All right, boys and girls. Sorry we're a couple minutes late for this live edition of a Peek Inside SEC Football. Allie Peek, TJ Pittinger. We've got some pretty exciting semifinal games to start talking about now. They're happening this week. TJ, this is like big boy football from now.
Yeah, we've talked about this, but it's a little interesting to me, and there are very much reasons why this happened. But it's certainly interesting to me that 1, 2, 3, 4 are gone, 9, 10, 11, 12 are gone, and we're left with 5, 6, 7, 8. I think I heard Ari Wasserman of On Three say this the best. Actually, no, it may have been Chip of Cover Three. I don't know, somebody. But essentially, like, I think the way we'll view college football is just so much different now. Like, we probably will have years where we kind of say, like, this probably would have been the champion any other year. Like, Oregon probably would have been it, right? If you kind of just look at the top 4 seeds.
Sure.
And then, like, who may have stumbled along the way but wouldn't have had an opportunity, and they're your actual, like, national champion. I think we're just going to view it differently. Like, if we, we're going to preview the games, but
because here's the difference. The new, with this new system is that there is a team that could, whoever's hot at the end is who's going to win, as opposed to not, who has the best resume the entire season all year long. If you're in the very old system where 2 teams go, right? Oregon is one of those 2 teams, 1,000%. Like, they're the only team that ran the table this year. They did it in the Big Ten. Like, it's not like they did it in a Patsy conference. They took care of business against Ohio State when they played them. Like, they and any other system would have been in the championship game, I think, which is definitely interesting. What I would love to see, though, is taking the BCS formula, putting these 12 teams in, and telling us what that seeding would be. Because I also think we look at this and more so than like, oh, the top talent's gone, the bottom talent is gone. I look at it and I think we did a shitty job seeding. We need to improve that portion of this process.
Yeah, I mean, if it would have been very, really close to the final college football playoff rankings, which was Oregon, Georgia, Texas, Penn State. So, like, last year, those would have been the 4 teams. Although I do wonder if they'd have, like, because it is political, like, would they have slid Notre Dame in instead of Penn State? Like,
not if they use the BCS formula, right? I mean, I guess true. The only part of that that you can manipulate would be the coaches voting, the poll. Right? The poll portion of that, which is still only a small factor. But, like, if seated correctly, we probably end up with these 4 anyway. They just had an easier path to get there potentially. Or,
well, I don't think Ohio State would have been in your top 4, right?
Yeah, I guess that's true.
So I don't know. I think we'll just look at it a little bit differently. Yeah. Like, in this situation, I mean, in the BCS era with 2 teams, we probably would have seen Oregon beat the heck out of Georgia.
Well, right? And when I say, we would have ended up with these 4, I mean these 4 at the end. And I think Ohio State, even no matter where Ohio State was seated, I think they're playing such good ball that they would have been in this Final 4. But I think, I don't know. I just think the rankings would have looked slightly different to get there. But let's talk about these games. This is like every blue blood college football fan's dream, these 2 games, right? First one, we got Texas and Ohio State, 2 just powerhouse programs, kind of play very different style of football right now. So many storylines that I just am so captivated by. Jeremiah Smith, I mean, has been... I am not sure that I can name a player that has been as dominant as him as a freshman. I mean, I think back to, like, maybe a Johnny Manziel, but it's different when you're at the quarterback position.
He redshirted, right?
Yeah, I guess that's true. So he would have been a redshirt freshman. Yeah. It was the first season we saw him, but yes, he was a redshirt freshman. It's just hard to think about anybody that just their freshman year balled out like this. And I do think it's hard to compare a wide receiver to a quarterback because he's just doing what he can with the opportunities presented to him, right? As a quarterback, you're so much more in control of what is happening because you're the person that has a large say in deciding that. The wide receivers just gotta catch the ball, right, when it's thrown their direction.
Yeah. The only thing I can really think that's comparable as a true freshman is maybe Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah.
who they won a national title his true freshman year.
Yeah.
Um, that's the only one I can think of. That
Yeah.
like there are other like some redshirt freshmen, like Jameis was a redshirt freshman, Johnny Manziel was a redshirt freshman. Like that has happened.
Yeah.
True freshmen doing it
I mean,
is
Tim Tebow was a
absurd.
game changer as a freshman, but he was a role player at that point as
Yeah.
opposed to, um, being as dominant. I mean, Jeremiah Smith's on the field pretty much every down their offense is on the field, which rightfully so. It's so wild to listen to so many pundits say if he was going in the draft this year as a true freshman, he would be the number one pick overall, or that
Yeah.
he would be wide receiver one on pretty much any NFL roster. And that is just wide receiver is in particular. I mean, most positions in college football, but I feel like wide receiver in particular is one that you just develop over time. So it almost feels unfair to think he's got to play 2 more years of football. What is Jeremiah Smith 3.0 going to look like in 2 years? Like that's almost scary to think about.
Yeah, he's probably going to be going for his second Heisman in 2 years. That's probably what he's going to be doing. And I worry about, from the Texas point of things, like I worry about them being able to stop him. They weren't able to stop Clemson's wide receivers, which no shot
Who are
at Clemson's
great,
wide receivers.
but not Jeremiah Smith. Nobody is Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah, they struggled at times against Arizona State doing some things. Like Scatterboo had a really nice long reception. And so I think Texas, that's always been the biggest question about Texas defense to me is how do they slow that down? How do they stop him? Ohio State has two really good running backs too. And so do you put two guys on him and have a kind of a light box and hope that Ohio State beats you running the ball instead of throwing it? I mean, that's probably the right answer. Like hope they can run, if you run the ball, you're chewing more clock, you're not getting as many yards per, down or play or whatever. I think that's the answer is you got to hope that they can beat you at running the game. Cause if they're throwing it a bunch, I worry about Texas defense being able to stop them.
Yeah. I mean, and it feels like Ohio State's going to be able to put up a lot of points, but another key battle. So it's basically, if we're talking about our battles in this game, one of them is Jeremiah Smith against Texas, right? Texas's defense. But another one that I think is interesting is Will Howard versus Quinn Ewers. I think Howard has been, I don't want to say disrespected this year because that's probably not fair, but I think maybe was a little bit undersold going into this season. I think maybe like counted out a little bit. And not that I think he's just viewed as like a serviceable quarterback as opposed to a real quarterback talent, which I think he's proven himself to be, particularly towards the end of the season. And then Quinn, this is somebody who was, a preseason Heisman, name, right?
Yeah.
That was floated around a lot. And I feel like he has had very much an up and down year. And it doesn't help to have Arch Manning chomping at the bit right behind you because fans have even less of a fuse for any nonsense when they got a Manning waiting in the wings. And I think that makes it complicated. He also was a little bit banged up this year. But what do you make of the Will Howard, Quinn Ewers, quarterback battle here?
When and I'm not going to quote this directly just because I can't remember exactly what he said, but I had Zach Smith on, wide receiver coach at Florida, and then obviously at Ohio State too. And I asked him in the offseason, like, okay, we talked Jeremiah Smith, we talked the running backs, we talked the defense, we talked the O-line. They were really confident about everything. And I said, but the key that makes the engine go is Will Howard. What are the thoughts there? Like, can you be honest about that? And he said, again, this is not a direct quote. I would need to go back and listen. He said something like they're scared shitless. Like that was the gist of like, we don't know. Like there are good days and bad days. Yeah. And I mean, you even look at like, he certainly played well through the year at times, but against Michigan, he was 19 of 33, like under a 60. It was one of his lowest completion percentages. He had 2 picks, one of them detrimental in the red zone. Like he was not great. And I think coming into the playoffs, if you looked at all the teams that you thought could actually win, right? Not necessarily SMU or Indiana or even Clemson, which Clemson actually would be in this, just from a quarterback standpoint. He was probably the quarterback you were like the most concerned about outside of a backup playing, right? Like outside of, Georgia not having their starter. He was the one you were like, he's kind of the, is he going to win a quarterback battle? And he's been the best quarterback in the playoffs. Now, again, it's nice to have the talent that he does at wide receiver, but you still got to put it on the guys.
Wasn't good enough to let him on the stage, but
Yeah. So, I mean, Howard's been phenomenal against
Yeah.
two really good defenses. Like we talked about how good Tennessee's defense was. We talked about how
Yeah.
good Oregon's probably got one of the best secondaries that was in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And he's been phenomenal. And Quinn has, I don't know, he's made plays when he's needed to, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
not trying to crap on Quinn at all. But I mean, she tweets and stuff about like they're calling for Manning like during the game,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
playoffs. Like he's not, I don't think, lived up to expectations. And that, I don't know, if there's a quarterback battle here, the way that they've played through, 16
Yeah.
quarters combined, or yeah, 16 quarters combined. Math's a little off, but then I think it's got to lean Howard's way. And if
Yeah.
they get down by 10 points, if he has an interception or two in the
Yeah.
first, like, do they go to Manning? I mean, I don't know. I don't know that that changes anything, right? Like, I don't know that bringing
Not
Manning in.
necessarily, but if they don't go to Manning, which I don't think that they would, think about how loud the noise is going to be towards Sark if they lose and they didn't go to him, and that's what the fans were clamoring for.
And they had a chance, yeah.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, yeah, I lean Will Howard there, and not even like I've got to think about it. Like Will Howard's the
Yeah.
quarterback that's playing better right now,
Yeah.
and he's going. We mentioned the secondaries. Texas secondary is a big question mark to me in this.
Yeah.
And Ohio State's is no, not probably. Ohio State probably has the best secondary left in the country, and
Yeah.
so yeah, it makes it even tougher there.
So we, talked about the quarterbacks, talked about the wide receivers. You mentioned briefly the running game. Can Texas get their running game going? And you mentioned this being one of the keys. Is this the key to you for Texas winning?
I mean, if they don't get the running game going, I don't see how they win, right? I don't have any clue. I mean, they didn't run especially well. Now they ran really, really well against Clemson, right? And so they had over 250 yards. And so that is not something to turn your nose up at. They had
Sure.
50 yards against Arizona
Yeah.
State, against a Big 12 team that was playing with their hair on fire, and I get all that stuff, right? Like they left it all on the line. So shout out to Dillingham and those guys for the way they fought. But if they don't run well against Ohio State, they will not win the game. Like I don't see Quinn going for 350 yards and keeping up with Ohio State's offense, which I do think is very balanced. As much love as Jeremiah Smith and those guys get, Ibaka and all those guys, I think that the running backs Henderson, I just think they'll. If Texas doesn't get the running game going, I don't see how they could even be competitive in this game, let alone win.
So obviously, if they get the running game going, that's not a great sign for Ohio State's defense. But as you mentioned, Ohio State's defense has been playing exceptionally well this playoffs. So what do you expect to see out of them?
It would not surprise me if they're so. It wouldn't surprise me if Ohio State not regressed a little bit, but if Texas was able to get a few things going.
Mhm.
I think Ohio State, it was so shocking that Ohio State was able to hold Oregon down and just kind of blitz them.
Yeah.
I, and as much credit again as the offense gets for the insane numbers they're putting up, outside of Oregon scoring a late touchdown in the first half when they were already down by 34 and the game was over, Ohio State's defense was unreal. And so I don't know. I would not surprise me if Texas could get things going a little bit better. But I mean, I don't think they have the talent at wide receiver that Oregon has. I don't think they have the running game that Oregon has. And I don't think their quarterback's playing as well. So it's tough for me to,
Yeah.
Ohio State, as much love as their offense gets, their defense is playing just as
Yeah.
well. And, yeah, I mean, it's a tall task for Texas. It's not saying they can't do it, but that's where I think they have to get their running game going. I don't think they'll be able to throw on them just at will. I think the secondary is too good. The defensive line is really good too. So I'm not taking anything away from that on Ohio State's side. But that's where if there's a place where you can attack them, I do think it's running the ball. And so you look at this game and you're like, oh, two high flying offenses, you might be able to have a lot of points. I think the way that Texas wants to play this defensively is to force Ohio State to run as much as they can. And then I think Texas needs to kind of get the same thing going. They need to have kind of longer sustained drives. And I don't think it's a low scoring game like Georgia Notre Dame was, but I do think that for Texas to have a shot in this, it does need to be a game that's played in the 20s, not in the 30s.
Speaking of how many points a team needs to win needs to score to win this game, Texas has given up a lot of points the last couple games against Clemson and Arizona State, maybe more points than we expected going into those games, particularly in the second half, which I think Ohio State has made some great halftime adjustments this playoff season. So what's the magic number there? You say it's in the 20s. What's the magic number? Clemson or Texas holds Ohio State to this, and they probably win the game.
I don't know that I would even say probably win the game, but like has a chance to. But if they hold them under 24, I think they'll be fine, right? But even then, Ohio State hasn't let anybody score that yet, so I'm not that confident in it. But if they can hold them under 24, then I think it'll be competitive. If Ohio State gets around 28 or 30, then I think it's going to be pretty tough for Texas to keep up with that. Fluke plays, turnover, special teams that you love, like all of that can be a very good equalizer. And you can, Notre Dame scored 17 points in about a minute and a half of game time because of turnovers and special teams.
Yeah.
And so, there is a path where you could score a lot of points in a bunch. But if things play out and you don't have massive turnovers or massive swings of, the ball going this way or that way, then I think they 24 would be my number. They give up 14 points to Clemson in the second half, which isn't a ton. Not trying to down there, but Clemson also got down in the red zone a couple of times and couldn't score. They got stopped on a 4th and 1 at the goal line. So they were give up 14, but they almost gave up 21. The thing with Ohio State though is Ohio State gets up on what they've done so far this year in the playoffs. They've gotten up on people so fast, and they've scored so many points in the first half. The second half just have not been competitive, and so if Texas is in a point where they get down by 10 or 17. And they don't have the ball, and how can they get the running game going if they're down by 17 points? And so that's where so you talk about 24 points would be kind of my number to where they can keep it competitive, but they need to hold Ohio State under 17 in the first half, which is a tall task, right? Like nobody's done that.
Well, particularly for Texas's secondary, which has really been a big question mark.
Yeah, and like we talked about with Clemson, like Clemson's wide receivers are really good and really talented. And they've got some true freshmen, TJ Morgan, alma mater there. But, and Wesco is really good. They've got some really good weapons. And I do think that as good as Will Howard's playing, Cade Klubnik is better. Like Cade Klubnik's a really good quarterback and could be one of the first couple taken next year in the draft. But still, if you're giving that up to those guys, just wait for Friday night because there's a lot better ones coming.
All right. So listen, we've talked, about Ohio State and Texas and what they need to do to win this game. Let's talk a little bit bigger picture for a minute. How much does the Southeastern Conference need Texas to play well in this game?
I'm going to turn that one back on you. I've got an answer on this, but I want to see what you think. We'll talk more big picture SEC stuff later too. And we may even kind of revisit this question there too. But what are your thoughts on that?
So I think the SEC needs Texas to perform well. I think I have a couple thoughts here. I think in the NIL era, more teams are competitive in all of the big conferences, but certainly in the SEC, because if the South has a lot of money that people are willing to blow on football, whether you're at South Carolina or Missouri or Georgia or Alabama, everybody thinks their team has a legitimate shot as long as they pour some money in it. And as a result, I think we are seeing really competitive teams across the board, but it may potentially have weakened maybe the top of the conference a tick. I still think it is absolutely the strongest conference top to bottom, no question. And I think any of these top teams running these SEC schedules we wouldn't have an undefeated Oregon. We wouldn't have, I think they would get banged up through the course of the season. But I think maybe, and I think maybe not just NIL. I think you can look at like Saban leaving Alabama. So maybe they've taken a step back. They lost a lot of talent last year, whatever. So I just think there's a little bit more parity in this conference, and that maybe the very top isn't quite as strong as it's been in previous years. But the SEC, from a reputation standpoint, from the outside perspective of these other conferences who already hate the SEC, right? They need to do well, because otherwise you're going to get all these other conferences that say, see, we told you if it was played on the field, you wouldn't really be the best. You're only the best because you tell us that you beat each other up week in and week out. That's not really true. And in reality, it is true. It is true that the SEC is harder top to bottom than any other conference. It is true that it's different to get up for 1 or 2 games a year in one conference versus having to get up for every single Saturday, because any given Saturday, any of these teams can beat any of the other ones. But it is also true that the SEC may not win a national title this year.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they just need to not get blown out, right? Like, I don't think winning is that. The perception. Now, I will say this: if Texas was to find a way to win this game, and then I think they might even be favored against. If they win this, I think they'll be favored against whoever wins in the next game. And they may go out and win the national championship against Penn State or Notre Dame too.
Yeah.
If they were to win it, it would kind of give some of that to like, okay, well, you talked all that talk about bowl season and these teams that lost in the playoffs and Georgia and Tennessee and Bama and all these other things, but we still held up the trophy at the end of the year, right? Like that'd be pretty big. But if they can just be competitive, if they can lose by less than a touchdown and then Ohio State goes and blows the next team out, right? And not to play the moral victory
this semifinal game was
really they were there. They were competitive.
Which,
That said, it is one game, and I don't think it makes now. If Texas, I think it's more to win, less to lose. Like if Texas loses, you ran into a buzzsaw. It's not that big of a deal. Texas is a quasi Big 12 team that's masquerading as an SEC team this year anyway. It's not. I don't think this invalidates everything that we've thought about the SEC for the year.
Sure.
So I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I think it could help a lot. If they could find a way to win 2 more games, it would be a big deal for the SEC to say, all right, we took your best shot and we were still the best,
Yeah.
So where some of our other teams not as good, but yeah, maybe. But Texas still went 16-1, right? So we'll still hold that up.
Yeah, but some of us real SEC teams over here are actually okay with Texas not doing that great year one.
It would have been funnier. It would have been funnier if Texas would have won the SEC, but they blew it like Texas always does. So, what's Ohio State 5.5 point favorite here? Who wins?
I think Ohio State, and I think they cover.
Yeah, the only thing that gives me pause is that it opened up at 5.5 and it's still just sitting there, and so I know the money has to be on Ohio State here. Like people have to, and the line's still not moving. So maybe Vegas knows something that we don't, but. And maybe a bunch of people will get taken for a ride betting on Ohio State and losing their money. But if that happens, it'll be me too. Because I think Ohio State wins this by 10 plus. I don't know if it's super competitive.
All right. Well, we got a second semifinal game to talk about. Penn State, Notre Dame. This is you've corrected me in a previous episode. The Battle of the Midwest. I picture this as the northeast portion of the country, but no, it's the Midwest. Okay. Another game that the Blue Bloods are going to love, right? I remember listening to an interview with Joe Paterno, years ago, and him talking about playing in a national championship, and essentially like that he used to tell his secretaries, if Bear Bryant calls, even if I'm in the bathroom, come out and get me because he's going to be able to tell me whether or not I have an actual shot at winning a national championship or not. Because Bear Bryant would basically determine who was going where for the bowls, which would then kind of help determine who was going to eventually win a national championship. And I always think about that when, now that Penn State has got things clicking again, I think of Joe Paterno, but this is an interesting game as well. And one that you actually may be getting to go to.
Yeah, that's kind of fun. I'm excited to maybe go down. I'm way more yes than no, but excited to kind of see it. There is nothing better than going to a college football game where your team's not playing. And everybody around everybody around you's freaking out, pulling their hair out or biting their nails off, and you're just like, I don't care, right? I went to the Georgia Bama game this year, and it was great. Everybody was having a meltdown in the fourth quarter, and I was just kind of sitting there chilling. You've done
that with me for a Gator game or two as well.
It's great. Everybody's freaking out, and I just don't care at all. Similar styles here. The biggest thing about this one to me, before we kind of get into the breakdown, is I think the narrative around, James Franklin, I can't win the big game. And I've seen some talk about this. James Franklin, you could say he can't win the big game, but every big game he's lost, the team on the other side of him was better, way more talented. And, Penn State fans may love this, may hate it. I don't really care. You're supposed to lose to Ohio State if you're Penn State, right? Like you're supposed to lose.
If you're the underdog, you're supposed to lose. So like if you upset, then again, it's an upset, right?
But he hasn't lost, like he's not losing games that like he shouldn't lose often, right? Everyone does it from time to time, but in their years, they've been good. And so what's interesting about Penn State is they have most certainly of the 4 teams remaining had the easiest path, though Oregon's path has looked easy Ohio State's path has looked easy just because of how good they are. But Penn State, I hate to play this game when you're 2-0 in the playoffs, but who have you beaten, right? You beat a Mountain West team and you beat an ACC team that a lot of people think shouldn't have been in. Congratulations, right? Now you get to play a team that is really good and did just take down Georgia and has played well this year. And so that to me is interesting. This will be the first time I think that if there was any credence to, James Franklin can't win the big game, it would be this one because both teams are similar. Both teams do
Yeah.
have similar talent levels. It is a 1 point spread, right? Like this isn't
Yeah.
like
This
he's a
is
massive
coin
underdog. This
toss
is a
right
neutral
here.
field where you should go out and you have every chance to win that the other team does.
Yeah. So, this is some smash mouth football, right? Like this is old school. They want to run the ball and they both play really, really good defense. So at that point, you know that those things are what they do similarly. So then you have to look kind of at their differences to figure out what could be the difference maker in this outcome. What do you think? Penn State's passing game? I mean, you trust that a little bit more?
Yeah, I kind of wonder with Notre Dame last week how much of it was. I do think Aller is playing better than Riley Leonard from like passing the ball. We'll talk about Riley Leonard running in a second, but I do think that he's playing better throwing the ball right now. How much of our view of that is because they haven't played great
Right.
defenses yet, and how much of that we view on the other side with Leonard was Georgia's defense, was their secondary just a lot better than
Yeah.
Notre Dame. Georgia's as with all their awards, they still have really good talent
Oh,
in their
absolutely.
secondary. And how much of it was the game plan? Like, hey,
Yeah.
we are going to run this ball and play defense. We are not going to try to pass all over Georgia because that's not the way that we're going to win. And so it's easy to say like, oh, maybe Leonard's not playing as well as Aller, but I think opponents, game plan, style, like Notre Dame was very comfortable saying we're going to run the ball. We're going to be, I don't want to say conservative, like they were scared to make a mistake or anything, but we're not going to turn the ball over. We're not
Yeah.
going to put the ball in harm's way. We're going to let Georgia do that with
Agree.
the true freshman quarterback, or not true freshman, sorry, first time starting quarterback. And so maybe it's a little unfair to say that, not unfair, but maybe there's a little context with Aller might be playing better right now, but is he playing within the game plan and, different than playing Boise State in the quarterfinal is a lot different than playing Georgia in the semifinal. And so Aller should look a little bit better.
Yeah.
That said, he's had ups and downs too. Like he's not been
Yeah.
perfect by any means. I think though, if there's a quarterback that I would trust to throw the ball a little bit more, it would, all that considered, it would probably lean Drew Aller's way.
Yeah. So, Penn State has done a pretty damn good job scoring this playoff season, but do things look better than they are because they've been able to capitalize off of turnovers and short fields? Like if they had to drive 80 yards every single time, would we be having these conversations, or are we just, or are they just taking advantage of these opportunities that have been presented and it kind of skews things?
I think a little bit of both, but you have to give credit to their defense. But
Yeah,
again,
for
like
causing
they
those
haven't,
for sure. But it makes the job easier for your offense and
for
makes you look
sure.
better.
Yeah. And so, yeah, they've put up a lot of points, but I mean, they scored 38 against SMU, and 21 of that came off of turnovers, 2 of them direct pick sixes.
Yeah.
So if I'd have told you they scored 24 offensively against SMU, you probably wouldn't say like, oh, that's an
Sure.
incredible performance, right?
Right.
It would have been enough to win because of how good their defense was playing, but you wouldn't look at them as some offensive juggernaut. And then
Yeah.
the same thing, like I think they had did Boise State have 4 turnovers? And that doesn't count like turnovers on downs. Like there's a lot of turnovers in that Boise State game too that gave them short fields at times. And so, yeah, I think that Penn State's scored a lot, but the second part of that is, will Notre Dame play kind of like they did against Georgia? Will they make it an emphasis, make it a focus to not?
Yeah.
Because Penn State, for all the, they've done that. They've capitalized. They've capitalized
yeah.
better than anybody else in this playoffs. When their defense has given them a short field, or shoot, the defense has gone out and scored by themselves sometimes.
Yeah.
Will Notre Dame kind of play? I don't want to call it conservatively because that just has such a negative connotation.
Mistake-free. Just
But
mistake-free football.
yeah,
It just, it will it's interesting, and I don't want to take anything away from Penn State's defense and what they did in previous games. So I feel like I got to be careful how I word this too. But I would be surprised if Notre Dame gave as many opportunities as Penn State's previous opponents have. And again, the defense causes those mistakes. I'm not saying they just miraculously happened and Penn State, capitalized on them. They're playing good defense is obviously a factor in fumbles and short fields and things like that. I just feel like those things are going to be harder to come by with Notre Dame.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then the same question for Notre Dame's offense, right? And Georgia's got a good defense. They've got a lot of talent. I get it. But for Notre Dame's offense, I mean, and you can't do this. I'm not taking anything away from the game in totality, but you
Sure.
take away a kick return for a touchdown and a clear, we're going to give you 7 points before the half. Notre Dame's got 9 points,
Yeah.
and maybe their offense had to do less with a big lead. Did they try to like
Yeah.
air, if you have a big lead, you're not necessarily trying to air it out every down. And
Sure.
so what
You're
could their offense
trying to just
potentially done? But same thing for them. They've been very opportunistic. They've capitalized when they needed to, and their offense was by no means elite against Georgia. They were good enough. Their best drive of the game, though, was when they had the big lead and they were just melting the clock away. They didn't have, I saw this, their longest drive of the game was 49 yards, and so they didn't have one, they scored 23 and, didn't have a drive over 50 yards. And so I think same thing you kind of think for Penn State. Now, again, was that game plan? Was that, who
sure.
knows? But I mean, not that you're gonna have a game plan to not have an 50-yard drive, but some things factored into that. But I think both offenses are kind of a question mark of who can score against this defense. I mean, kind of thought that Georgia, Notre Dame would be low scoring. I mean, I expect this one to be pretty low scoring too. I don't think either team, if either team got to 30, I mean, that team's winning, like
Yeah.
that's just kind of how I
For
view this
sure.
one.
There's some defensive injuries for Notre Dame. You think that there's a possibility that allows Penn State to maybe be more effective on the ground than Georgia was able to be, just based purely on injury situation?
I think so too. And I expect Penn, even without the injuries, I probably would say that Penn State would be a little bit more effective just because Georgia's
Yeah.
running game was pretty trash all year, and they never really seemed to get it going. So yeah, Penn State probably would have anyway. But I like Allen and
Even
Singleton a
when
lot,
they took
and
our RB2.
I mean, he was about the only good sign until that fumble, where the game kind of changed after that. But yeah, I would think so. I like Allen and Singleton a lot. I like Jeremiah Love on the Notre Dame
Yeah.
side. I think they'll all three have really good games and be able to be somewhat effective. But yeah, I do think Riley Mills is out. They had another injury on the defensive line. I think he went. They did get him back at some point in that game. But how banged up are you? How much
Yeah.
of that was taking a shot of something? Whenever you were on the sideline or whatever. But yeah, I
Right.
don't know. I do think that Penn State will be able to run the ball. Some. I still really like Notre Dame's defense. But I do think that that'll help them. Yeah, I think they'll have more than 50 yards, which is what Georgia finished with. I know there's some sack stuff in there too, but yeah, they'll definitely be better on the ground, I think, heading out of this one.
All right, so let's give some predictions. What's the line on this game?
I think Notre Dame's favored by like a point and a half, like it is razor thin.
Yeah. So it's a toss up. What are you thinking?
I think I'd lean Notre Dame. Did you watch the Bucs game today? Riley Leonard is a little bit like Baker Mayfield, just gets out of things that he just shouldn't, and he's not. I mean, I think he had 80 yards against Georgia, but it wasn't like he just had a 45-yard rush and then just kind of like piled on meaningless yardage. Every single one of his runs, it felt like were big plays. A 3rd and long, a 2nd and 10, a first and 10, and he gets 8 yards to set him up on 2nd and short. Obviously, the one around the edge that came right after the fake punt, or not fake punt, but like the punt shenanigans.
Mhm.
All of his run, like he doesn't, I don't want to say he doesn't want to run, but he doesn't want to run.
Yeah.
He just does in big moments. And
Yeah.
I think that's probably the difference here. I'd lean Notre Dame. I think I'd lean Notre Dame by a field goal. I'm going to the game with a Notre Dame buddy. So again, I say I don't
But
care,
you're
but I
rooting
would
for
like
Notre
to.
Dame.
Yeah, I would like to ride back in, some
I just
happiness. But if we don't, I'll just put AirPods in and be fine.
I
Um,
think Marcus Freeman or I think Notre Dame gets a coaching edge here. I don't
yeah,
not that I
I'll
don't
agree with
like
that.
James Franklin. I do. I like James Franklin a lot. I think he's a really good coach, but I just think Notre Dame is just clicking on all cylinders right now. So creative, so innovative, and I don't know. I think they're going to come up with some really cool schemes, and I think it's going to make it fun to watch.
Yeah, give me 21-20.
21-20.
Just an
Okay.
absolute classic.
All right.
When I lied last week about Oregon Ohio State being the best game, I really meant this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, that was a dirty lie. I,
Mm.
I was on there with you too. I
I
thought that
don't
was
think anybody thought that we were going to get that.
no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Give me Notre Dame and let's see. I'm gonna say 28-24.
I like it. I like it.
All right. Very good. All right. Well, we'll obviously discuss the outcomes of this later on in the week, but let's take a minute and talk about coaching in the SEC. saw an article a couple of days ago talking about for the first time in a really long time, all of the SEC coaches are returning for 2025. So all 16 coaches, head coaches, will be back. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some on the hot seat. So I want to talk about it. I think obviously I'm a Gator fan. Coach Napier spent a lot of the year on the hot seat, and truly that seat cooled as the season got to probably the last third of the season, and for two reasons. Florida started winning and recruiting picked up. And I guess maybe the third reason is that our athletic director told us he's not going anywhere. So, the seat just cooled by maybe nobody's doing but the athletic directors. But winning happened, recruiting happened, chilled a little bit. But I do also think, DJ Lagway, everybody wants to see what can be done with Lagway with a full year as the starter. And it's still got to be do or die for Napier, though, right?
Yeah, his seat definitely cooled.
When I say do or die, I mean improvement. I don't mean like he's got to make the playoffs or win a championship or he's getting fired. I just mean there's got to continue to be incremental improvement.
Yeah, no, they looked a lot better. Like for all the warts or all the things that
Yeah.
they came out with really good wins, and they were competitive in some games that nobody really thought they would be competitive in. Now, the Tennessee game is probably like half his fault, but he was still playing with a true freshman on the road. And the Georgia game, if Lagway doesn't go down, who knows, right? Like they had a chance in that one for sure. And so
it could have gotten to 10 wins this game. And again, or this season, I don't want to play coulda, woulda, shoulda. I don't love that, but they're a few plays away from winning 10 games this year.
So with him, I wonder, we talked about all the reasons why he might not get fired earlier in the year, and a lot of that had to do with the athletic director. I'll ask you because you may have a better view on it than I do. Has the athletic director's seat cooled some too because of the way the football kind of kicked up there at the end? Basketball's doing really well. Like
I almost feel like
cooled some?
It's on pause right now, kind of. I think, basketball is clicking on all cylinders. They did lose to Kentucky yesterday, but, this is a top 10 team that's going to make some noise in March. Now, what could change that is, this investigation, going on from the Title IX stuff. So, if that doesn't go the way that Florida is hoping it could go, I think then you're looking for a basketball coach and you're looking for an athletic director, because I don't really know how one goes down without the other. But for the moment, it feels like his seat has cooled a little bit because football has improved and we're at a situation where we're at least going to see another year. Hopefully we see another year and it makes us want to see another 3 years, but time will kind of tell on that. But they got the quarterback of the future in, and the football team is winning. Baseball is slotted to be one of, the best programs in the country yet again when, first pitch happens in the spring. So you've got to think for the moment it's calm.
We need to go to another baseball game together this year. But yeah, no, I agree. If Strickland's around in 26, then I think Napier's around in 26, right? Like that, they would go hand in hand.
UF doesn't have a president currently. They have an interim president at the moment. And I've actually been told that it may not be until 2026 that UF has a president. And some of that has to do with the fact that some of the candidates that they're looking for with other jobs have commitments until that point. And the person that told me that's pretty well connected. And I thought that was kind of interesting, but that is a factor in all of this too. An interim president has made it incredibly clear that they have no interest in firing an athletic director, right? So Strickland doesn't have a whole lot of pressure on him to fire a football coach. It doesn't behoove him to make a change there. I think it just makes him even more on the chopping block when a new president comes in. So we may just really be in wait and see for a whole nother year at this point.
Yeah. Like I don't really see, unless they just go, 3-9 or something, or, really like 5-7 would be pretty depressing for UF next year. But yeah, if they go under 500, even 6-6 would maybe be like a question mark. Like, what happened? Was there an injury at the top, or like how did you go 6-6 right now with all the hype that they've got, heading into 25? So yeah, I that seat has cooled, but they play Miami kind of early. They play Texas kind of early. Like it could, it could certainly heat back up if they don't get off to a good start. And their schedule was tough this year. It's tough next year too. So
Yeah.
if they start poorly like they did last year, I don't know that it'll be the same grace that they got this time that he got this time. So, but it has definitely cooled. Like his seat is not nearly the hottest in the conference.
No, somebody who may have the hottest seat in the conference, though, may be Brett Venables at Oklahoma, which is not something I would have thought I said, but Oklahoma was incredibly disappointing this year in their first season in the SEC, and obviously it's hard to follow a legend, and DeBoer is seeing that at Alabama right now, and so this is hard for Venables, but I don't know. What do you think there?
Yeah, listen. I would try not to put too much into bowl games either, but they went out and beat at the time number 7 Alabama, and I thought he gained back like all the favor. Right? They beat Alabama. They held them to 3 points. That was a
Sure.
huge win for him. And then they come out and get blown out by LSU the next week.
Yeah.
And then again, not trying to put too much into one singular game in a bowl game where a lot of guys are out, but then you go out and lose to Navy in a bowl game as a favorite. Like
Yeah.
you're not getting fired over a bowl game. Like that's just not happening. The people don't
Sure.
really care that much. But it's a microcosm of their whole year. They weren't competitive against Texas, their biggest rival. They weren't competitive against South Carolina. They lost by double digits to Ole Miss. Lost to Missouri, who was finished at 10-3 actually, but Missouri was so up and
Yeah,
down.
but we talked leading into this season how Missouri could essentially sleep and
Right.
should go
Missouri
10-2.
Missouri had just gotten blown out by A&M, and then they go and beat Oklahoma. I mean, shoot, they barely beat Tulane and Houston earlier
Yeah.
in the year, right? And so, no, his seat is hot.
Excuse me, Tulane is a juggernaut.
Tulane was pretty good this year. All their guys like got stolen away to other programs, but yeah, if he doesn't make a bowl next year, or if they don't go at least, I don't know. To me, they've got to go
They
7
got to win 8
at least.
games, I think.
Yeah, like they can't even go 6-6. If they
The
go 6-6,
standard at
I think they'll fire
Oklahoma
them.
is just higher than it is most places. And
It is. Yeah, they're used to winning. Doesn't
They are.
Oklahoma have the most like national they're up there, man.
they're
Like
up there. They're
and
blue
so
blood.
it's not like Texas who came in here and I think Texas won 2 Big 12 titles in 12
Oh,
years.
yeah. Oklahoma had
Oklahoma
been
dominated
dominant
the Big 12.
for decades.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so they're not used to this. And I know it's the SEC and I know every week all this stuff, but you can't lose to Missouri. And you can't, it's not even the every week's a battle thing when you're barely beating Houston, right? Like that ain't the SEC beating you up. That was
Right.
week 2, man. Like, come on. So this
That was
wasn't
supposed to be your off week.
yeah. I mean, in Oklahoma in other years would still be in their good years, they're at worst like a 9-3 SEC team,
Yes.
right? Like they might lose to one they shouldn't, and then lose to the Georgias and Bamas, and then they're winning the rest of their games. They should never be losing to Missouri or
Correct.
Ole Miss or South Carolina. And I know Ole Miss and South Carolina had good years, but come on, man, like you got to be
So
competitive
Missouri.
in these
But
games.
yeah, you got, and I think part of it is not even being competitive in some of them as well. What about Mark Stoops at Kentucky? I think we have joked for years. When Napier was on the hot seat earlier this year and towards the end of last season as well, there were Gator fans mentioning like, shoot, do we want Stoops? Because he had dominated Florida for 3 years in a row. But it seems like potentially the honeymoon is kind of coming to an end there, which I find interesting because I have always maintained one of the best jobs in the country. They'll pay you whatever you want. You need to win between 8 and 9 games a year and everybody's happy. If you get more than that, then you're overachieving and they're going to bonus you or whatever. Like you can do what you want and you have essentially lifetime job security. Didn't feel like that this year though. I think Kentucky fans are a little bit over Stoops. It seems like Stoops is a little bit over Kentucky fans. Like, is the seat hot here?
It's hard to judge this one because like who could they realistically hire that's better than
It's
Stoops?
better than Mark Stoops. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it would just be it would be a step to me, and I don't know how many Kentucky fans will watch this, so maybe it doesn't matter. But to me, it would be a stepping stone job. Like they could go get a really good coordinator from a high level SEC team or
Who's going
a
to
really
stay for 2 to 3 years.
yeah.
do their
Like,
work,
okay,
and
here's
go.
one. Could they go get Fran Brown had a great year this year. Won 10 games first year at Syracuse. They won 10 games at Syracuse. Like let that sink in. Came from Georgia. He could get a job at Kentucky and be good for 2 or 3 years and then he's off, right? Like I mean, let's just call it what it is. Now, I will say Is there a possibility that, and I guess we really haven't answered the question here. Is there a possibility that Kentucky could invest in their program to get it to where it's at an Ole Miss level, at a
Yeah.
consistent
Yeah.
like
I
level
think
that's kind of
so.
respectable? I don't think they could ever get to, your upper echelon of LSU, Bama, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, Florida when they're playing well. I don't think he could ever get there. But could they get to that Ole Miss level? And so
Yes.
if so, you could turn that in. But even then, like Lane doesn't seem like a lifer at Ole Miss. Like that's still kind of a
Yeah.
somebody big comes calling, he's out. So I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think you're going to do better than Mark Stoops. I think if you're smart, you're maybe investing in NIL and you're letting Stoops be that person that takes you to the next level, which I do think Kentucky has invested some in NIL, but I also know they've got a lot of big money up there that, they could probably do more with, right?
Yeah.
But it seems I don't know. It seems unrealistic to think that you're getting somebody to come in for more than a couple years that can do a better job than Stoops. And with Stoops, as long as you keep him happy, he's going to be there till he retires. And there's something to be said about the job security because you never know if the next guy's going to be better or worse than what you had. And in
Yeah.
Kentucky's, I don't know. In Kentucky's case, I can't. It's hard to picture it being better. So, what about another coach that was on the hot seat leading into this season? And, I guess the jury's maybe still out is Sam Pittman at Arkansas.
Feels like Billy Napier to me.
Yeah.
With less expectations. I don't think Arkansas has the
There's less
expectations.
expectations.
But they fought incredibly hard for him. They were supposed to lose. Like they beat Auburn. They were supposed to lose that game in the preseason. They beat Tennessee when Tennessee was number 4 in the country. That game slid under the radar because it's the same day that Vandy beat Bama. But people forget Arkansas beat Tennessee. Were they down 14-0 and still beat them? So they beat them. They blew out Mississippi State, which again, how much credit are you giving them for that? I don't know. It's Mississippi State. But man, they barely lost. They lost to Texas by 10.
Yeah.
And then they went out at 6-6 and blew out Texas Tech as an underdog in their bowl game. All of their guys opted out. Nobody playing, or not opted out, but like in the portal, opt out, injury, this, that, and the other. Arkansas had a skeleton roster and went out and played their butts off and beat the tar out of Texas Tech, who was supposed to beat them. And just kind of the way that the guys played hard for Billy Napier.
They play hard for Sam
They
Pittman.
Yeah, so to me, it's still just on pause. If they go 4-8 next year, he's going to get fired.
They did a decent job recruiting. I feel like Arkansas is a pretty difficult place to recruit to in the SEC when you just think about who all you're going up against for that same talent, right? But I do feel like Arkansas has done decent recruiting as well.
Yeah, and so I don't know. It's kind of like it's tough to be a mid-level team in the SEC or mid to bottom level team in the SEC, right? Like we talked about earlier, how every week really is tough. You have to get up. If you're Tennessee, you can lose to them. If you're Texas, you can only beat them by 10. Like those things happen.
Yeah.
And you lost to a team in the semifinals and another team you beat that was in the playoffs and you went 7-6, right? Like that's just kind of, but yeah, I mean, to me, he's still just kind of on pause. Seat's not as hot. They'll go into next year with a little bit of excitement, a little bit of like, hey, can we sneak 8 wins out? Can we get to, a point where we play these teams really competitively again and do a little bit better? I don't have a lot of confidence that they can, but Arkansas didn't have to play. We talked about schedules. Arkansas didn't have to play Georgia or Alabama this year.
Yeah.
And so they don't next year either. They will have to play Texas. But again, if there's going to be a way that you could potentially find your way to 8 wins, not having to play Georgia and Alabama is a great way to do it.
It's a good way to start. Absolutely. They don't have to play Florida either. Not that,
I'm not putting them on the same level. Okay. Sorry.
What about Hugh Freeze at Auburn? I think this is something that's interesting. I feel like he's similar to Coach Napier in that the seat's maybe a little bit cooler now than it was at the midway point of the season, but rougher start than Harsin, who they canned after 2 years, right? And so I don't know. And Auburn has very, very little patience and a very, very loud and powerful booster group.
This feels like Billy Napier 2.0 to me. Year 1, underwhelm. Year 2, underwhelm. Year 3 is the prove it year. And Billy did a great job in the Florida did a great job in the second half of this year, but it certainly didn't start out very well. This is like that. This is that year 3 for Hugh Freeze. Yeah. Like they've got all the talent in the world. They went out and they got this quarterback. I'm not super thrilled with getting the Oklahoma transfer to come in. We'll see how he does. But to me, it feels like what this year felt like for Napier. You got to
Yeah,
go out
and
and prove it, or we're going to fire
even
you.
even from the PR perspective, I think too, because I know there were several times when Hugh Freeze this year in post game press conferences, essentially blamed his players for not executing well. And when I say Coach Napier, I'm not saying Coach Napier says that, but I feel like that he has had some PR blunders over the course of his 3 years at UF, and this feels similar to that, where you know fans don't maybe want you to throw the players under the bus. They want you to stand up there and take accountability as the coach making almost $8 million a year to get wins. I don't think that helps in this situation.
Yeah, and so he's got to. I don't know. They got to prove it this year. And they were so close, man. Like they went 5-7, but they had I mean, just, I don't even know why you're throwing the ball there. They had a game ending pick 6 against Oklahoma is why they lost that game. I
Yeah.
think that was the same Saturday that I was up in Tuscaloosa, watching it on the bar before the game. And then they blew it against Missouri too. Like they had a late lead against Missouri. And I think with like less than a minute to go, Missouri drove down the field and beat them. They lost to Vandy by 10 in a game. They only scored 7 points. And I know Vandy was better this year than normal, but still,
Yeah.
you're playing Vandy at home. You can't score 7 points, right? Like you gotta, Vandy wasn't known for their defense this year, right? Like the team that Oklahoma held to 3 points in Alabama, put up 40 plus on them when they played Alabama. So yeah, they were so close. I mean, if they win those 2 games, if they win 2 of those 3, then they're 7-5. You get to a bowl and you win that like Florida did, and you feel much different about this year. And so their quarterback play was really bad. We didn't ever do a segment on this, but this was the first year in forever since before Saban was there that 0 of the top 10 players from the state of Alabama signed with Alabama. Like
Yeah.
6 of them signed with Auburn. And so, yeah, like the talent's there, right? The quarterback question is still a question to me. But if they figure out the quarterback, then this has to be the year that they go out, and again, they do play Alabama and Georgia every year, which makes it tough, but there's no Texas on this. There's no LSU on this. Like you play a manageable schedule outside of those 2 games, which are incredibly tough. I get it. You get Alabama at home this year, which is a help. It's always weird on the plains, but this is the same thing to me as Napier was this year. This is the prove it year.
You mentioned the recruits in the state of Alabama signing with Auburn. Let's talk for a minute what I would say is a secondary tier to this. Okay, so we talked about Napier and Venables and Stoops and Pittman and Freeze, and I feel like those are probably the warmest seats. And maybe it's a toss up whose is the warmest. But the next kind of tier, which is like we're insane fans and we just need more tier, would be Kalen DeBoer and Brian Kelly. So, DeBoer didn't make the playoffs this year. That is his cardinal sin here, right? They didn't make the SEC championship game and they didn't make the playoffs. They barely missed the playoffs. And Alabama fans are already kind of over him. And, we've talked in previous stories on this channel, but also just in our friendship over the years about how you never want to be the person that follows the legend. You want to be the person who follows the person who follows the legend. And so is Kalen DeBoer just doomed to fail because he's coming directly after Nick Saban?
I don't know if doomed to fail is the right thing, but he'll never live up, right? Like there's nothing if he retires as the GOAT, then he can live up, right? But he'll never live up, right? They could win 2 titles over the next 10 years. And for any other college, like if I offered you 2 titles right now for over the next 10 years, you would take literally anything. Like you could probably offer most college football fans like, hey, you're going to win a title next year, but then the next 5 years, you're not going to make a bowl. Most college football fans would take that. Like I would take that like immediately. Like I wouldn't even think about it.
I don't know. Alabama fans have
different expectations. Yeah, like
the promised land on such a regular basis for so long that they don't. I don't know.
Going to be good enough for them.
Yeah.
So again, I don't think he's doomed to fail. I just don't know. I think he didn't just get to Alabama and forget how to win, right? Like I think he was kind of handcuffed with their quarterback situation this year with Milroe, who I just don't think is very good. I didn't think he was very good last year. Incredibly athletic, incredibly talented, but yeah, I think he was kind of, this was a tough year in year 1. They barely missed the playoffs. Again, not making too much of one bowl game.
Yeah.
But for them to lose to Michigan in such embarrassing fashion and have all the turnovers in the first half, Michigan was a 2-touchdown dog. If they'd have won that game and kind of finished on a high note, finished with a little bit of positivity, again, bowl games mean very little, But it just when you just kill yourself over bowl losses when you did finish the way they did, and Ole Miss gets to kind of, hey, we beat the tar out of our opponent. That's why we should have been in.
Yeah.
DeBoer's like, everybody says, see, that's why we didn't put you in, right? Like
Right.
that, you
Right.
were a 2 touchdown favorite against a
Right.
Michigan team that was completely depleted
Yes.
and had a backup quarterback in. Then that quarterback gets hurt, and you still found a way to lose. It just he's not nearly on the hot seat. He could go 8-4 next year, and he's not getting fired. So it's not like a hot seat conversation, but it's like we're pissed. We're Alabama fans and we're
Yeah.
pissed because you didn't go 17-0, right?
Yeah.
Brian Kelly's the one that's interesting to me
Yeah.
because outside of LSU, where they've had a crap ton of talent and they just can't find a way to win enough big games, right? Lose to Florida State both the first times to start. I think they've lost 5 straight season openers. And guess what? They open up at Clemson next year.
Well, and
So
that's not just a Brian Kelly problem because it's not like
for
he's
sure.
been
Yeah.
there 5 years.
But 3 of the 5 for sure
Yeah.
are him.
Yeah.
They were favorites in both those Florida State games. They were
Yeah.
they had USC this year, who wasn't very good, and they found a way to lose that game on a neutral site as a favorite. And so, yeah, I just and again, they're going to be a dog going to Clemson next year to open up the year, and it'll
Yeah.
probably be 3 or 4 points. It's not like it's going to be Clemson -10 or
Sure.
anything, but they're going to be a dog again. And if they lose another season opener with Nussmeier coming back, who had Heisman odds this year, he'll have Heisman odds again next year to start the year. I don't know. But outside of all of that, outside of everything they've done, they've done less with more, right? How much does Marcus Freeman taking Notre Dame to the semifinals impact it?
Yes,
And beating
make you
Georgia?
change how you think about Brian Kelly because that's essentially what he told us when he took the LSU job is he needed to go somewhere where he was going to have the resources to be able to win a national title and kind of made it seem like, the academic standards at Notre Dame made it next to impossible. The unwillingness to, bend in other areas made it just unlikely in today's college football world that you were going to win. Now, to be fair to Brian Kelly when that happened, that was right on the cusp of NIL starting, right? And I'm not saying LSU doesn't have a ton of money because they have huge boosters, but Notre Dame, when they want to, is got to have some of the most money of anybody in the country if they're willing to put it towards the right things for them to be successful. But yeah, Marcus in just a short amount of time having the kind of success he has kind of blows holes in the whole Brian Kelly, you know, saga.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think he's been fine at LSU. They've obviously recruited very well. They've
Sure.
done very well in the portal. There's so much talent that's playing well on Sundays. They've got some of the best young wide receivers in the league right now that you can even imagine that both
Yeah.
played under Brian Kelly. Shoot, they had the Heisman winner who is killing it in the NFL right now for Washington. And so when you look at all that, you just think like, man, how did you go 9-3 last year? Right.
Yeah.
And in their losses, they got, this year they get blown out by an okay, above average, but like an okay by their standards, Bama team. Last year they get blown out by Florida State. They're some of their losses you just look at and you're like, they go to Texas A&M and lose.
Yeah.
And again, Texas A&M lost 5 games. Like this is just, it was weird to me, or not. It is weird to me that like they just always, the big game, yeah, here's the one for you. We talk about James Franklin and all these people that lose the big game. Like Brian Kelly's the one losing the big games that he's not supposed to.
Yeah.
He's the one that has to turn that around. Now, again, I'll say this: they go 8-4 next year. I don't know that he is safe, right? Like I think they need to be better than 8-4 next year. And I'm not saying that. I mean, there were people this year that were saying once they had lost to A&M, and certainly when they got blown out by Bama, now they rebounded well. But yeah, I think there were people this year that were saying like, "What the heck are we doing here, man? You've got more talent than they've got a top 10 roster every single year. Why do we keep going 9-3, 8-4? Like you just got to get better."
Yeah. So how many of these coaches are back in 2026?
So 16, right? Outside of coaches potentially leaving for other jobs, like I wouldn't count it. Like if Lane was to leave for a bigger job, like I wouldn't count that, right? Certainly, I don't think like the wheels would have to insanely come off for like, DeBoer is not going anywhere. Obviously Kirby Sarker not going anywhere. Mississippi State, they're not moving on. Clark Lay is not moving. Shane Beamer seems pretty entrenched there. I think, I would even lean toward Napier coming back in 26. I'll say 13. I'll say 13 coaches come back. Like I'll say 3 coaches get fired, retire, whatever you call it. Like I could see Pittman saying like, I've had enough of this. Like I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Pulling them out, maybe even pulling like a Malzahn, like I can kind of read the writing on the wall. I'm going to go over this other school before I get fired, So not counting coaches taking different jobs. Like if Lane
Right.
leaves or something else, that doesn't count.
Right.
Coaches
Right.
getting fired or knowing they're getting fired, whatever, retiring, I'll say 13. What about you?
I'm going to say 14 are back.
Who are your 2 to go?
I kind of think it's going to be Venables and Hugh Freeze.
Oh, I forgot about Venables. Yeah. He's in my 3. But yeah.
That's my guess there. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to watch for sure. And obviously, how these schedules shape up is going to have a large say in this, and how some of these, DJ Lagway is going to have a massive say in how Napier is.
Quarterback play really for all these teams. Venables, they got the best quarterback in the portal in Mateer from Washington State. So I think they'll be better next year. Yeah. But we'll see, right? Like they've underwhelmed, both his first 2 years. And then same thing at Auburn. Like I'm not a big believer in who went over there, Jackson Dart. Like we'll see how much he can get out of him, but the guy got benched at Auburn. I don't know how much, or I'm sorry, at Oklahoma. I don't know how much faith you have in that quarterback swap. So I think quarterback play will have everything to do with it. If Lagway doesn't play well or doesn't live up to the expectation, then I think Napier's gone.
Gets hurt or something. Yeah, it could make a huge difference.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, let's talk for a minute about the SEC in 2024 and how the SEC did in the bowl games. I think generally, so going into this bowl season, looking at the past several, the SEC traditionally does incredibly well during bowl season, even though that we're in this bowl era where people opt out, right? And bowls have taken on kind of less meaning than they have in the past, but obviously I would say the marquee loss has got to be Georgia, right? Georgia just losing the playoff game, but Texas won. So maybe does that balance it out there a little bit?
Maybe a little bit. We'll see what Texas does this week. When you play, I'm not trying to take anything away from Texas on this, which maybe I'm about to. When you play a team that was ranked 16th and got in because they won a weak conference, and then you play another team that was, outside of the top 12 and won a weak conference, then I think that you probably get a little, like Texas to me gets a little bit less credit than Georgia gets blame, right? Like I don't think they balance out.
Yeah.
But if Texas goes out and beats Ohio State or even just keeps it competitive with Ohio State, then I think it might kind of weight back that way. But I need to see Texas, first of all, put together a full game, and second of all, like beat somebody that doesn't suck. I don't think Arizona State sucks. I don't think Clemson sucks. But like comparatively, Texas has a top 3 roster in the country. Clemson and Arizona State are not close to that.
Right. So, outside of those 2 playoff teams, then we go to what I would say is like the next
Tennessee too. I didn't write Tennessee down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Tennessee as well. Tennessee just kind of got embarrassed. And I would almost put Tennessee, like, I feel like Georgia and Texas are kind of in a tier above where I would have put Tennessee, Bama, South Carolina, and Ole Miss, and almost looked at those 4 somewhat interchangeably, right? They were all, I would say, about relative the same talent level, about relative the same record. Tennessee happened to be the one that got in, but I could make an argument for any of those next 4. Obviously, Tennessee got blown out. They did play who I think is the toughest team in this playoff at the moment in Ohio State. I don't know that they lose round 1 if they're playing some of these other teams in there, but they lost, right? So then we look, Bama plays a Michigan team that we said earlier is incredibly depleted, opt-outs, injuries, the gamut. Bama, it's a 2-score favorite, and they lose, right? Which the optics of that is not great.
Yeah, it's hard to cry wolf or cry foul, right? And then go out and get embarrassed.
Sure.
Right. And so it's kind of like, all right, well, the issues that you had through the year that cost you against Vandy and cost you against Tennessee and cost you against Oklahoma, like those issues showed up again against a Michigan team that is talented, but certainly not on Alabama's level this year or many years. And so, that's a bad look for Bama. Again, it's one game, but their season in totality was not one game, right? They lost 4 games they shouldn't have. And I think they were were they not at Tennessee? They were not. 3 of their losses, they were double-digit favorites.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
unacceptable,
Yeah.
right? I don't really care about that. I mean, I do care about the bowl loss, but I don't. That one means less. But still,
Yeah.
they lost 3 games as double-digit favorites. Like that just cannot happen. How many games did Saban ever lose as a double-digit favorite? Like probably not 3 in his whole career.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't think 3
Let
ever.
alone 3 in one
Yeah.
season. So
Yeah.
they were. I mean, they weren't Bama this year, right?
Yeah.
Like they were still really good. They'd beat 100+ teams that play in this sport, but they certainly, weren't Alabama.
Yeah. Well, and then after this game, Milroe opts out, or not opts out, but declares for the NFL, which was kind of an interesting thing for me because I mean, he didn't play particularly well down the stretch here. He definitely didn't play well against Michigan. Thought it was really interesting. The announcers seemed to kind of be making excuses for him, like, oh yeah, that throw's really bad, but he's one of the best in the country, or not looking great today, but man, if he returns, he's a Heisman favorite for sure. But yeah, so I mean, they'll be breaking in a new quarterback next year as well. Milroe in the NFL will be an interesting thing to watch for sure.
I saw Felipe Franks catch a touchdown today, so maybe he just needs to go
When
the
you
route
think
of
about,
not
about
quarterback.
the career that man has had,
Yeah.
I mean, what is he on year 9?
Milroe needs to go not quarterback, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say that's probably a fact. Then we talk about South Carolina, another one of those teams that I put in that kind of the tier below Texas and Georgia. They were a 9-point favorite to Illinois and they lost. And they're one of the teams that was beating their chest as well. Hey, we could have, should have been in the playoffs.
Yeah, they were somewhat challenged offensively at times this year, but I mean, their quarterback played and their really good defensive line play. Like they were there.
Yeah.
And so, to lose to Illinois, it certainly got a little heated there at the end with the coaches stuff at the end, which was pretty entertaining to watch. But yeah, again, you can't lose to Illinois. I don't care who opts out or who doesn't play. Like they didn't lose to, a really good Penn State team that just missed the playoff. Like they lost to Illinois, right? And Illinois had a better year this year than many were probably expecting. But that's, again, you can't beat your chest of like, we should have made the playoff or we deserve this or that, and then go out and just embarrass yourself. And I get it. Bowl games don't matter, but they had some, you got to go out and win. As a 2-score favorite, you need to go win, right?
Yeah.
If your guys are playing and you're a 2-score favorite at a neutral site, you need to go win. And, they didn't.
The only team in that tier of teams that held up their end of the bargain, and Lane Kiffin is not going to let us forget about it the entire offseason, would be Ole Miss. They blew out Duke. Wasn't close, really took care of business. And I do love when a team gets snubbed, right? And they still show up for their bowl game. They put in a full effort. Obviously, not a meaningful bowl in any stretch, but they showed up and they did the thing. Are they maybe the only team that had the legitimate argument that, hey, maybe we should have been in? And to be fair, all they had to do was win and then they would be in. But
yeah, I saw it. Yeah. It becomes that argument that we had earlier, right? Of deserving and best and this, that, and the other. And, I don't think Tennessee getting blown out invalidates their merit for having been in, but do I think that Ole Miss probably would have been more competitive than Tennessee? I mean, probably. Like they're just built a little different, like offensively, and I think they would have shown up a little bit better. And you look at some of their losses, like their loss to Kentucky, they really controlled that game and blew it late. Their loss at Florida, if not, they had really bad turnovers that kind of cost them in that game. They outgained Florida, not to go the whole Mullen route of yards matter that much, but they played well enough outside of their massive mistakes. And so, yeah, if you just finish a little bit better, they probably would have been more competitive. But at the same time, just like I'm not going to fire DeBoer over an Alabama loss to Michigan, I'm also not saying that Lane Kiffin's the greatest thing that ever happened because they blew out Duke. Because, first of all, it's Duke. Second of all, Duke had a lot of, they did what we thought Alabama should have done to Michigan. Duke had so many opt-outs. They had so many guys not playing. They went out and they wanted to make a statement against a team they matched up really well against, and they did it. And so I do think there is a lot of credit that's deserved there, but that doesn't undo the way that they peed down their leg against UF and Kentucky.
So the SEC as a whole in 2024, now that the season's over, what are your impressions of the conference? Down some?
they're not. I agree with you fully that they are still the toughest week to week. Like having to play Arkansas and Auburn as your mid-level teams. Like I would absolutely rather play Cal and Wake Forest and Rutgers, right? Like they're
Right.
like or your bottom of the barrel Big 12 teams or your bottom of the barrel wherever. I would absolutely still say they're the best top to bottom. But I almost wonder if because it's almost like the SEC's greatness could also be its demise. I don't know. I'm thinking this through as I'm talking about it. But obviously the SEC has made so much money because they've been so good and their programs have invested back into themselves. And so you do have recruits that are at times picking Missouri, and you do have recruits that
Yeah.
are at times picking Ole Miss.
Yeah.
You have
North
recruits that are at
Carolina.
times not, and Missouri never recruited like this before. And you've got
Correct.
Kentucky picking guys off. You've got South Carolina picking guys off. And so
Yep.
all of that money that's been generated because the SEC has been so good, let's be fair, riding on the backs of the elite programs like the Bamas and Georgias and Florida, 15 years ago.
LSU.
Like because they have ridden,
Mhm.
I don't want to say ridden those coattails, but it has allowed all the other programs to invest that back in. Whereas
A
I don't
rising
know if
tide raises all boats.
it does. But where are they taking those elite players from?
Each
Right? Like
other. Each other.
exactly.
Right?
And
They're because
and
there is
Ohio State, and I don't think that happens in the Big Ten. Like I don't
as
think
much.
like the
Right.
Big Ten makes a lot of money too, but I don't think Rutgers is investing back into their program like a Kentucky is or like a South
Yeah.
Carolina is.
Yeah.
And so, or an Illinois or
Well, and it's a thing of the
Wisconsin.
past that you're going to sit for 3 years at Alabama, pick up a couple of national titles while you ride the pine, and then play for a season or 2 for them before you go to the NFL. Now all of those guys that would be on the bench for the first couple of years as they earn their stripes, so to speak, are just jumping ship to a Missouri, to a Kentucky, to a Florida, to anywhere that where they can immediately start and immediately make the NIL money.
Yeah, and I don't think that again, I don't think that that is as much of a problem in the Big 10.
Right.
I don't think it's as much of
There's
a problem.
still only a couple of great teams
Correct.
at the top.
They're not losing Midwest guys to, Minnesota, right? Like they're
Yeah,
not like they're
yeah,
still going to the big programs. Ohio
yeah,
State, Michigan, Notre Dame, I know they're not in it, Penn State, and that's about it, right? Like somebody
yeah,
might grab a guy here. And I don't even think it's a problem. I mean, look at the it's a much lower level of this too, but it's not really a problem in the ACC either. Like people aren't
no,
picking guys off from Miami or people
right,
outside of the conference, sure, right? Like if
sure,
Miami's in a battle with Georgia, but like
right,
the ACC it's still top heavy, right? Like
yeah,
even with going 2-10, Florida State still had the third best class in the conference, right? Like
yeah,
guys are still going to go to Florida State, Clemson, Miami, and everybody else is going to have to take the leftovers. And so
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that the SEC's greatness is kind of it's been where it's leveled off. Now I will say this: it is 1 year, right? And
yeah,
so does that change a little bit? Does somebody kind of right like can a Texas kind of have more long-staying
mhm,
success because of the money they pour into it? Can a Georgia get right back to where they
sure,
were? Absolutely. Could somebody rise up and take it? But it feels like because there's so much more parity within the conference
yeah,
now, it feels like it's going to be harder for a team. Like I don't know that we'll ever see that sustained dominance. I mean,
yeah,
we talk about Georgia. Georgia very well could have lost to Kentucky. They very well could have lost to Florida. Like Georgia could have been an 8. They could have lost to Georgia Tech. Like now they didn't, right? Like they
mhm,
found a way to finish. They could have very easily beaten Bama. Like there were
yeah,
things that the ball's going to bounce your way or that way. But like the
yeah,
dominance that we've seen from Georgia year over year, like they
yeah,
could have been an 8-4 team this year,
yeah,
right? I mean, they went to 8 overtimes with Georgia Tech, a 7-6 team from the ACC, and so I just think that that dominance that we're used to seeing, it's hard to imagine
yeah,
it'll be so much tougher to build like that
yeah,
team. And then you factor in all of that with we are going to beat the hell out of each other every single week, right? Like,
100%.
and so it's because everyone has elevated so much, or most teams have elevated so much in the SEC. It is not just, the joke was always, it's just Bama carrying the conference. Like everybody else stinks, which was never really the case. Like Bama was just so
Correct,
much better than everybody else.
right,
But the small bit of truth that there was to that, because they were so much head and shoulders over everybody else. Like, I don't know that we ever get that for a sustained
yeah,
amount of time anymore.
yeah. Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting to see. You're going to have a whole bunch of 9-3 teams instead
Mm-hmm.
of one or two, 12-0, 11-1 teams. And obviously, the way that the schedule matches up year after year is another factor in this as well, because there's 16 teams, so you don't play everybody every year. So there could be the best team in the conference who gets the draw of playing, let's say, an Alabama, a Georgia, and a Texas in the same year, and that skews things as well. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see going forward. I'm interested to see how these last couple playoff games shake out as well. Do we have some more SEC dominance? Does Texas pull it off? Does Notre Dame finally, get back on top? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. But we appreciate you guys so much for tuning in, whether you are watching this live or you're watching a replay of it. Make sure that you are subscribed to A Peek Inside SEC Football. And we will talk to you guys real soon. TJ, this was fun.
I cannot wait for Thursday night.
All right. I'm excited as well. Go Gators, guys.
I'll just cheer for Notre Dame.